Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast, powered by the Snowbird US Day Tracker app. I'm your host, Gerry Scott, and my goal is to give you answers to your cross-border questions, to ease the stress of a cross-border move or extended trip, and to keep you up to date on all you need to know with cross-border rules and regulations. Now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast. We have a returning guest, Carol Sadler from Achen Henderson in Calgary, home of the Flames. As yes. Mike likes to say, what did he say? There's a nickname for Calgarians as well.
We are sometimes called Cowtown. Those of us who live here don't always go with that, but it is out there. Right now it's home of the snow, which is a little unusual for Calgary at this time of year too, but here we are.
I should be more up on this because I am spending a lot of time visiting my oldest brother lives out in Mahogany in Calgary. So it's a quick little flight. So, But Carol, welcome back. And like I say, today we're going to be dealing with Canadian citizens that have moved to the States. And we're going to be talking a lot about estate planning issues. Sometimes these Canadians come home, sometimes they stay, and then they've got their adult children having to settle their mom and dad's estate. So let's jump right into it and give us a brief summary. And I've got lots of questions. I was telling you earlier that I'm a fan of Chat GPT, and I've got lots of questions as well. So fire away.
We'll make sure to answer them. Let's start with our Canadian individuals who have moved to the U.S. and become U.S. residents. For Canadian tax purposes, their status in the U.S. as a resident may not really matter. For their own purposes, whether they're simply resident there, so for example, a work transfer, they've got an L1 or H1B visa, TN visa, or whether they're a citizen, have become a citizen or became a green card holder, may have repercussions for them in the U.S. But the interesting thing for Canada is Canada really looks at residence being a test of where you are, what soil your feet are on. A lawyer buddy of mine was talking to recently said, I think about it as dirt. Where's the dirt that you're on? So we kind of use the same principle there. And the reason I bring that up is people say, well, I'm only here on I'm only here in a transfer. I'm here for work. I may very well retire back to Canada, which again can be another whole topic. For Canadian tax purposes, so for what's occurring or is going to occur for mom and dad for their estates, the fact that the kids, if I can call them that, are residing in the U.S. and not in Canada, so they're not filing and basically for CRA, that means not filing Canadian tax returns, not living here anymore, living in the U.S. I think that's a big consideration to have, because I've had people sit and say, "Oh, I'm only here temporarily." Well, that's great, but right now, for our planning purposes, there you are in, Texas, California, New York, wherever they might be. You're a U.S. person and a non-resident, and that causes some complications, as you can well imagine.
It gets me thinking is that when you see this and we see this, is we see these Canadians moving down south and they're working with their immigration lawyers. And once they kind of get through that stressful process, do they take the time to get wills done? And we know they should, but that must be a problem, not getting wills done and still having a Canadian will.
Yep. That can be for the people in the U.S. Exactly. And I can, on the one hand, I can sympathize, because if you're not sure, if you're a couple years into an employee transfer, let's say, or a TN visa, and you've only got a few years before it's going to be renewed, and you probably think it's going to, but there's some uncertainty. I can see folks being, well, we'll just see how it goes. But it's not an impossible situation. You can, and now we're treading into a bit of legal territory where I feel like I should say I am a tax accountant, not a not a lawyer, with apologies to my lawyer friends, but we do collaborate and cross. And I can say I do know it's not impossible, say, for someone from Calgary and Alberta who's moved down to Denver. It's not impossible, if something happens to that person, they've only got a Calgary will, to have it probated and handled in the States. It's more complex, it's more costly, but at least it's not impossible.
Okay. Now, I would imagine that when clients do leave Canada, they move down to the States, you still provide tax services for them. You still have that relationship. So they're still kind of tied on to that Canadian accountant in Calgary. That would be, I guess that would be quite common.
Very, very common. Really, what that person needs is someone who can, the term they use in the States is practice before the IRS. We don't really say practice before CRA in Canada, but the idea is licensed or licensed in some way, that you can, that you've got those credentials. The way I put it to people is, hopefully you never need to talk to the IRS. But if you do, you need someone who can say, yes, I was qualified to prepare this return. I'm qualified to talk to the IRS. So that's where myself and actually a couple other people in our team are also US CPAs. So we can talk to the tax authorities on both sides of the border. A bit of, I think it's an advantage, I guess I might say, where you really need to get, lawyers are generally certified in one place or the other, and sometimes in a state, not in another, in a province, not in another. You even see that in Canada with Albertans with BC property meeting a BC lawyer for probate or other transfer purposes. But so the filing process is one that can be, basically be handled pretty much anywhere these days.
We're going down a very interesting road because we are seeing people on these short-term visas, maybe an E2 or the other visas that are mentioned here. I think you're right to say that these people don't think they're down there permanently, so they kind of are still kind of straddling. So maybe they haven't exited Canada 100%. They would still have assets in in Canada. How does something terrible happens to that professional person or whoever it is, move down on that visa? How complicated is this if they still have Canadian assets and they're a U.S. person?
Now now if they're a U.S. person, and if they're not a Canadian resident any longer, and that's quite common. I decide I want to practice in Palm Springs, which, with the snow out there, is looking real good these days. Instead, and I can do, for example, instead of in Calgary, so I move myself, my practice, down to Palm Springs, or I work with someone there, whatever the case may be. Get my visa, get down there. But I've left, say, my RSP, perhaps TFSA, perhaps a non-registered account, just because I haven't found an investment advisor I like yet, or I've got someone who can manage both. And step off the curb the wrong way, the old story. The first issue is, and I haven't changed my will because I wasn't sure how long this is going to be. It was only going to be a few years. There's the legal difficulties in getting that will probated in another state. It is doable. It's just going to take longer. I mean, that's where our legal colleagues can give us more advice. So I can tell you it's not. The good news is it's not as if you've suddenly died intestate with your will simply out of the picture. It's going to take longer. You're going to need an Alberta lawyer. You're going to need a California lawyer. But that can occur. Now, there's probably not going to be any Canadian tax filings if I'm no longer resident in Canada. But say if my RSP isn't rolling to a spouse, let's say it's just me and I wanted to, and my will says my RSP is going to go to the 4 kids, there is going to be withholding. There is going to be withholding tax on RSPs, TFSA at least is okay, or a RIF. So there's going to be some withholding tax. Then the interesting question is, now I'm in the U.S., I'm a resident, am I subject to the U.S. estate tax? And that very well may be likely, but if I'm only, if I put it that way, there in the U.S. on a visa and resident status, not got my green card, not applied for citizenship, there's a question then of the actual test for estate tax is a question whether you are domiciled there. So someone with U.S. citizenship or green card is presumed to be domiciled. A resident, there's some question. Domicile is a stricter test, a tougher test than residence. Domicile is basically the place that the place where if you're not there, you're always planning to return to. So there's an interesting question about whether you would or could escape estate tax. And that really becomes a legal question. So I always just throw it out there saying there's some advice that's going to be needed at the time. And now if you're under the current 13 million U.S. estate tax exemption, then it's moot. You're not going to pay any state tax. But for someone who's over, there's an interesting question. Was I really domiciled there? I've only been here for a few years. I left my assets behind. But I am, I may have left some family behind, but I am living and working there. So I just throw it out that it becomes complex and you need a lot of legal help. Not impossible. So question then again of is there going to be any double tax? Like I said, they're probably not going to be filing a tax return in Canada, but there will be withholding. If you do have estate tax, I'm not sure there's going to be credit available. So there's a bit of uncertainty there.
Okay. Okay, so now we're going back to mom and dad. They've lived there for 30, 40 years. The kids never went down with mom and dad. They never moved down. They basically stayed in Canada, no exposure to the United States. Do we have the same rules where those kids cannot act as an executor, as we recommend that if the Americans live in Canada, you don't want to have any U.S. executors that are living in the United States? Do they kind of apply the same rules? So you're in Canada, you're in the United States, mom and dad live there, but they've put their Canadian kids on as executors for that U.S. will. Is that a problem as well?
That can be a problem. So I'm just going to make sure I'm following you correctly on where everybody is. So yeah, mom and dad are in the U.S., but kids are up here. So yes. Okay. So, a bit of a legal issue, and this happens on both sides of the border, where it may take more work for the person in the other country to administer the estate. I can speak a little bit more if I flip it to the Canadian side and say mom and dad are in Canada, kids are in the U.S. People worry that creates a U.S. estate, and it probably won't, because mom and dad live in Canada, they're resident there, their assets are there, their will is created under the law of Canada. The problem with U.S. kids being executors is there's a lot of things that must be done in person, so it's a lot of travel, a lot of issues coming back and forth. Technically, a non-resident person should be posting a bond. Idea being that the law in Canada can't necessarily reach them if they don't fulfill their fiduciary duties, abscond with some money, hightail it back to Texas or wherever, and Canada law says, sorry, rest of the beneficiaries, these guys didn't do what they're supposed to, but we can't find them there for the bond. That can be waived. Again, that's a bit of a legal matter. I know some of my colleagues say it's not that difficult in certain circumstances to waive that. So it becomes more a practical issue of here's the person who has to keep traveling to or spending a lot of time in Canada to get this estate administered. So alternatives are co-executors, find someone in Canada, maybe it's a trust company, maybe it's other individuals. The one positive thing about that is that, as I mentioned, the existence of the U.S. executor does not create a U.S. estate or U.S. filing obligations on itself. Now, when I flip it back to what you're saying, where mom and dad are in the U.S., executors are here, that does create a Canadian estate as well as a U.S. estate. Canada's rules are stricter in some sense, in that if you have executors, trustees, or beneficiaries who are in Canada, even if the settler deceased person properties in the US, you still created a Canadian estate by the fact that you've got those couple Canadian roles, I guess, filled or positions.
We can't stress enough. You mentioned corporate trustees. Um, more more often, we're saying if these families can, and depending on the size of the estate, having a corporate trustee when you're dealing with cross-border issues is so powerful and takes a lot of stress off of individuals, because there's a lot of mistakes being made, even by very competent people that are on south of the border and trying to help mom and dad settle that estate in Canada. It's a corporate trustee would be a lot less stressful,
I
regardless of your
agree.
intelligence.
Yeah. And it's certainly still possible to have input. I've seen a lot of drafting where they're either co-trustees, or now that still involves, hey, now that may not be perfect, because that still means, hey, we still have one US individual, so we've still got those problems. More trustees gets a bit unwieldy. But what I've seen in a lot of drafting, like, is a corporate trustee appointed with, and I actually have to go back to the exact wording, but basically with the U.S. family member to be an advisor, and in a lot of cases can also ask, those drafting the will, mom or dad, put some wishes together, put some letters together, some notes, make your wishes known, and draft the will such that the corporate trustee must at least consult with the family or the U.S. person. So there's a way to keep, because I know a lot of people say, I want my family involved. I want to know that, son or daughter, whomever it may be, is looking out for what we want, is making, is there, just make sure our wishes are fulfilled. And that's certainly one way to do it that I've seen recommended. I like that.
So we've covered the tax implications, which we know are complex, and I can't stress this enough. This is not a do-it-yourself webinar. Our purpose is to connect, is to educate people, and more importantly, connect them with the right professionals like Carol, and which we've had a chance to work on many opportunities together with different families we work with that are cross-border. The legal considerations are, and once again, either you're using a corporate trustee or making sure that you have, and Carol's got great referrals on the legal side. If a person came to Carol first, she's going to be able to connect you. And let's talk a little bit more about how complex cross-border financial planning issues are, regardless if you live in Canada as an American or a Canadian living in the United States. Anything else you want to add that people should be concerned about? More so today's podcast, which is Canadians living in the United States.
Canadians living in the United States. Exchange rates are always on my mind these days, especially with what's happening to the dollar and uncertainty about the dollars. There's some question about how long it takes to move assets, when you can move assets. Something that just occurred to me when you mentioned financial, and I mentioned having a U.S. executor where that's not, there is, no law against it, I guess is the way I could have put it before. Some difficulties. One other difficulty could be if we've got Canadian assets, we may need a Canadian bank account opened. Mom and dad had money in banks in Canada, and now we want to consolidate those into an estate account. It may need to be in Canada, and it's not impossible, but it's really, really difficult to open up a bank account in Canada if you don't live here. It's even more difficult to open up a bank account in the U.S. If you don't live there, and you need, say, an estate account to be set up. So that can be a practical difficulty. And honestly, that's one where I don't have any really good solutions. Just kind of have to keep things we can do till we can find someone who can work on it.
Well, having gone through the experience of setting up bank accounts in Maui with the First Hawaiian Bank, at the best of times, it's stressful and a lot of things are required and that could be personal or corporate accounts. But then you add a death to the situation and trying to get this done, it is a painful process.
It is that.
When it comes to estate planning documents, what do people really need to be focusing on here? We mentioned that a lot of people are moving to the United States short term, and maybe they might overlook getting a will or power of attorneys done. Anything else do you think people should be considering when it comes to estate planning documents?
Um, One of the things interesting, I'll pose a question on, yes, there is something else, and I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to this, but I think about the process in Canada. So here, if it's you and I, we're here in Canada, this is where most of our assets are, and this is where we live. We're always advising people that, people need a will. You also need and the other two documents to go with that are a power of attorney and a health directive. That's kind of the trifecta, if you will, of documents that one should have. I mean, the will is the main thing, but you never know what can happen, whether it be accident, whether fortuitous old age, and now I'm 95 years old and I just don't want to handle things anymore, so I want someone to handle my financial affairs, and I want to give them that power of attorney, or need to do that. The boomers are aging. I think that's going to be a big issue, and even for even for our millennials and so on. If you're you ought to, even if you're going to be away for a while, those are the three that you ought to consider. And I would think a health directive in the U.S. That's what I'm saying. I don't have any answers, but it seems to me those would be some important things to have, because those are the power of attorney and the health directive are I guess even the will, but the other two, that's for that, one in, that tiny chance, like I said, that something happens and you're incapacitated. And
We
what
had
happens?
we had a podcast with personal injury lawyer, practices in Ontario and Palm Beach down in Florida. And I got to tell you, because we're all concerned about this, we've talked about the power of attorney for snowbirds. If they're in the state of California, if they're in Palm Springs, or if they're in Arizona, and they're spending 2, 3, 4 months there as they're aging, they really want to make sure they deal with a local attorney to get a POA done, because that is the number one concern. If you're incapacitated, you've basically left all your loved ones that are trying to look over you. The power of attorney that you might have in Canada is not going to function in Arizona or the state where your beautiful your winter residence is. So that's a concern. But we really went into all the liability of, you have car insurance in Canada. In Canada, we have what they call underinsured drivers, which isn't that expensive in Canada because we don't have that many people. And then you go to the United States and you try and buy underinsured coverage, and it's a huge premium. And I think that's the biggest thing that came up for these Canadians that are either living down there part-time. They tend to be underinsured. And we look at insurance and POAs. These things are all commodities. What does it cost for me to pay for that and to get that done? Be prepared. And I think those are the things that we're running into that are serious for snowbirds, and they need to be aware of it. And we're going to continue to bug them. And once again, some people might say bug them, but we'll use the professional word. We're going to educate them and make sure that they're going to be connected to the right professional so they can follow up with the podcast. But yeah, so that, once again, that kind of falls under one of my topics of professional advice. Please do not try this at home alone.
Exactly.
Because it is very, very serious. And before we go, Carol, let's talk about some of the practical issues of these people trying to manage this stuff, and then maybe having their children up in Canada coming down to help them. So what else can you add about practical issues that people should be concerned about when we're dealing with this?
I think we alluded to this before, but travel is a big one. Be prepared that you're going to need to spend a lot. It's not easy to settle a estate at the best of time. It's going to take a lot of travel, a lot of time down in the U.S. That's just something to plan for personally. If you think things are taking a long time. You're having to go back and forth to get or stay in the US to get issues dealt with and settled. That's just par for the course. So that comes with a personal cost, a time cost, a money cost. Uh, and certainly an executor can be compensated through the will for fees and so on, and for a bit of time, but it just takes a lot of person. Uh,
You know, the big thing
something I
out there, sorry to interrupt you, Carol, the other big thing out there that we should be really caution people about is that everybody has online accounts nowadays,
that's
and making sure that those online accounts that you're communicating to your POA. And the other thing too is that everybody has passwords on their phones, and that POA should have the password to your phone, and even your safekeeper, your vault with all your combinations, because a lot of these accounts, you're trying to go online to help your parents or whoever you're serving as the POA, but make sure that you have that step, because that second step, when you're logging into someone's account to a system, you're going to need that second code. And I haven't heard many people talking about this at all with digital information.
No, you're right, and it's something that's just starting to come to awareness. I'm going to put a quick plug in here. One of my designations is a TEP, Trust and Estate Practitioner, through a group called STEP, Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, which began in England, where, if you think we have estate issues, it's a whole industry over there. It's something very different. Anyhow, Canada and the US both have people with that designation. And it's something that that professional organization is just starting to promote, is that you need you need to provide all your digital information somewhere, somehow, for a POA, in, as part of the will, as part of the assets. You talk to your, it's always been advised that you talk to your executor, let them know, or executors, let them know that's going to be their job, a little bit about what's going on and where all that can be found, because it'd be really difficult otherwise, if mom or dad pass away suddenly and you don't even know the password of their computer. Maybe they have a password to protect their computer, but no online access, because you don't know where they stored the passwords. Or, like I said, phone. That's another really really good one. So that is. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's just starting to come to the forefront. And now that I'm just imagining all the bad things that would happen if you didn't have that. If you didn't have that access. So I'm really glad you brought that up. That's really critical.
I know when my wife, when she's doing some online banking for us, she's always trying to call me and send me the code, the banking code, or whatever the case is. And of course, those things are time sensitive. Well, I'll tell you what, you put a great plug in for your designation, and I'm going to put a great plug into for the Snowbird US Day Tracker app, because this podcast
Yes.
and other podcasts you can listen to them right away, right from the podcast. We've done some great updating when it comes to a 12-month rolling calendar, which is so important. I don't know if it exists. Does it exist? But everybody seems to be being questioned from an immigration point of view when they're going across the border. What is your 12 months? So we put it on the app, and like I say, the podcast is visual. You can access the podcast from the app, and so spread the word, because we put a lot of money into that app, and the job is to try and educate people. When I started going down to the States in 1981, spending more time in Maui, it wasn't that big of a deal. We had a bunch of draft dodgers up in Canada from the Vietnam War in the 70s, and it seems like it was just two very friendly countries. But now, since then, we've got so many issues that people have to manage, and that was my motivation. If I'm confused, and I work in finance, and I have for 35 years, if I'm confused, I could imagine, those moms and dads out there that are going back and forth must be really confused. So, Carol, I want to thank you again. I'm sure there's so many opportunities we're going to have to have you on the podcast, and I hope a lot of people are getting out of this. So, And once again, to get a hold of Carol, here's the really major plug that's going to go out to every person in North America right now. How do they get a hold of you?
Best way is my email. We mentioned the firm name Achen Henderson, so Achen Henderson. Carol at achenhenderson.ca. Another good way to get a hold of us is through our website, so just Google Achen Henderson and you'll find us. And thank you for that. I'm glad you mentioned the track, because I was going to say that your cross-border accountant is going to be asking you about the number of days you spent in the U.S. And if you say, gee, I'm not really sure, I was kind of here about this time, I'll be saying, great, go check and get me the number of days and the days. So go get that app and make your life easy.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that, when we get the phone calls in, people are always asking about trying to determine when they go home so they're not in trouble. And there is access to U.S. border crossing website, which will allow you to print off your I-94. So much great information, and so much great information from our partners like Carol. So Carol, thank you very much. I appreciate all your insight, and I know we had a chance to visit you a couple months ago. So we look forward to seeing you again when we're out visiting our friends and partners in Calgary.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to the Snowbird Expat Radio Podcast. The best way you can support the podcast is to forward the episode to a friend, and please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Now, before you go, let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Be kind to all, the world is small.